Thank you, Secretary of State. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Brian Aitken, editor of the Journal. My role here tonight is to facilitate a question and answer session here with the Secretary of State. We've got roving microphones, so I think the format will be, if you have a question for Mr Pickles, put your hand up. If I can spot you, I will. If you would then stand up with the microphone, say your name and who you represent, and I'm sure the Minister will enlighten us with an answer.
I've been in politics a long time, so if I don't know the answer, I'll make up something that sounds reasonably convincing.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure that you actually gave a very interesting speech there, and I'm sure there's a lot of questions that will come out of that regarding the whole the planning process, which I thought was really interesting. There may well be questions about our third river, which is the Weir. That may elicit some questions as well. One of the privileges of actually hosting this session is I get to ask the first question, and it's a question that I will pose to you by way of a confession. First of all, is I'm a supporter of Aberdeen Football Club, and Aberdeen Football Club are pretty rubbish, really. They've been rubbish for some time, ever since Alex Ferguson left, probably. But they're not very well run, off the field and on. But just because Aberdeen Football Club are rubbish doesn't mean to say that we would abolish all the other football clubs. So I guess, why the rush to abolish the RDA here in the North East?
I think your analogy is too strangled, really. But I think we're in a different kind of world. You know, that the RDA had many fine qualities. I'm saying nothing particularly against it, but it wasn't terribly successful. Under its tillage, it probably wasn't its fault. During the boom, the economy actually contracted. It was the only part of the country that actually contracted during the boom. I suspect it's not the RDA's fault. It's just the RDA wasn't terribly good. I thought the RDA was actually quite dandy about moving one sector of public money to another part of the public sector. But look, just be comfortable with yourself. My nearest old football club was Burnley, so I feel your pain. And let's just move on.
Yeah.
And I think the kind of projects I've been hearing from the local enterprise partnerships look pretty good, look pretty exciting. And I think we are in a new kind of world where we're moving away from grants towards growth.
Okay.
And I apologise about the Weir, but nobody's brought me any projects about the Weir. But you are quite right. Geography was never my strong point.
Is there any questions?
There's a chap over here.
We've got a microphone here.
Eric, you called me a troublemaker earlier on this evening, so I might as well end the evening as I've begun the day. The localism bill, which is going through the House of Commons at the moment, if it's to mean anything, Eric, will you listen to the people in the North East and not proceed with the decision about the elected police commissioners, which are a waste of money and which will take real accountability from the police authorities and possibly even put them in the hands of extremists?
Police commissioners are not in the localism bill, but I'll certainly pass your remarks on to Theresa May.
Is there anyone else?
Secretary of State, David Crammond, South Tyneside Council. In terms of freeing up local authorities to support economic growth, is there a prospect of tax increment financing in the next couple of years? And will the Treasury be persuaded to allow us to take some entrepreneurial decisions and risks in terms of stimulating private sector growth?
Yes. It's certainly my intention that should we decide to go on the repatriation of the business rate, that TIF will be part of that process. And I mean, I came to a view, I may be wrong, but I came to a view that big bang in local government are all ending disaster. And I thought it was kind of important to move on local government changes kind of incrementally And the New Homes Bonus was the first real attempt to reward enterprise within the grant system. I think where previous attempts to reform have gone wrong, from the poll tax right the way through to the various changes that Labour did to the formula, I think the problem is that the ambition of doing everything together just became too frightening. And that's why I think it's kind of important to get the repatriation bedded in, and a kind of understanding that that local authorities are then in a position then to determine the level of income. And I think you need that before TIF can absolutely operate. And also, can I make absolutely clear, as I've made clear to some council colleagues, in the system that we're talking about, there's no way I'm going to be sort of exposing the elderly on the hillside and sending children up chimneys. There's no way in which I would expect areas within the northeast where there's a high dependency on central grant to be able to finance everything from the revenue from business rates. But there is sufficient within the system to be able to get you that sum to keep as a right. I think the secret is this, not just for places in say Surrey or whatever, with high kind of turnover, is that places that are currently very dependent on grant, any addition that you're able to put for the increasing in grant in revenue from rates, you should be able to take. I mean, the current system as it operates is, you show any initiative, you build any houses, you do anything better, we say, thank you, very well done, we'll have our money back, which is a ridiculous situation to be in. We're currently kind of looking at the system, how it works. And as it works, as we're beginning to see, the places that will benefit from this kind of system are places like Manchester, Liverpool, the North East, and many of the coast cities. And I just, I come from a similar kind of area than this. It used to really grate in my gullet having to sort of talk to ministers how bad things were. I thought Bradford was the best place in the world. I wanted to take that entrepreneurial spirit and to get people to come there. But in order to get the money, I had to keep telling people how bad it was. And it's a strange position to be in. Okay. There's somebody over there, I think.
There's a gentleman back.
Secretary of State, I'd be interested in your view on how you would see a resolution between your aspirations for growth through localism and the undoubted drawback of NIMBYism.
Well, at the moment, NIMBY is absolutely a completely free option without any consequences. One of the weirdest, I've talked to some of my predecessors, some of the Labour predecessors, and they went through the same thing as me, is we all take it turns to do some of the bigger planning appeals, and it's all done sort of, you sort of go by yourself, receive the advice and do your best to sort it out. It all goes out in my name, so I often find myself I've put a nuclear power station, so when it's the first I've heard of it. But you would kind of look at these things and they would go through. And the really weird thing was, you say to the officers, what's it doing here? It's screamingly obvious that this is a good thing. And they would say, well, the council actually would quite like this. But it was very unpopular locally, so it's much more convenient for you to take the decision. Well, there's a technical term for that in planning. It's nuts. That's a terrible way of going about things. So what we're saying is that once you have the presumption in favour of sustainable development, localism gives power, it also gives responsibility, but it also gives, with power comes responsibility, comes consequences if you don't take those opportunities. We have through just in housing, through the community infrastructure levy and through the new homes bonus, you can definitively show that more new money is coming into an area. Now, given that everything has to conform to the presumption in favour of sustainable development, there clearly will be consequences to councils if they decide it will be a good thing to have something, but a bad thing to vote in favour of it. So I think it is squareable, because this is a genuine power down, and to face the consequences of those decisions if they get it wrong.
Okay. Table 13.
Yes, I think it's acknowledged that there is less guaranteed money coming into the North East, and everything has to be applied for and justified. So where we had a certain amount of, in effect, guaranteed money through the RDA, etc., which helped to pump prime entrepreneurs and startups, etc., that is not there as it was. My concern is for new small businesses, etc., and what the government is going to do about the banks. Now, the evidence is now overwhelming by both the statistics and also by the reports from the banks that they're not lending as much money to small businesses as the government want them to do. So, seeing there's no guaranteed money coming to help pump prime a lot of new businesses, what's the government going to do in relation to getting the banks to actually be a little bit less restrictive in loaning money to businesses to get started up or to expand?
Well, my advice to the chairman of the two LEPs is to pick up the phone and to talk to the chairman of the Coventry LEP, because they've got on with it. They've organised proper meetings between small and medium businesses with local banks, the local management of banks within that area. They've come together in terms of agreeing a kind of protocol, and within that area, money is starting to happen and money is starting to move, and local firms are getting the opportunity because there is an organisation that has kind of grasped that. And if you forgive me for saying so, we've moved from a situation where, you know, the state doesn't pick winners. And if you forgive me for saying so, I'll just repeat earlier, it wasn't very good in this area. Insofar, it was the only area of the country when the rest of the country was booming, the economy actually contracted. Now, I mean, it seemed to me to be illustrated. I had a bunch of folks come down, not from the North East, from various LEPs that came to see me and said, well, you don't have any grants anymore. And I said, yes. And so we'd actually like a few pounds just to pump prime, which is sort of code for give us your money and it'd be nice to have it. So eventually I said, well, how much do you want? And I said, well, it'd be very nice if each LEP had about £25,000. So I said, well, if you had a dinner dance and a good raffle, you could get that. So the following week, they went to see Vince Cable and asked for £250,000 each. But we do talk. Now, I think you've kind of got demonstrated, so you've got the councils involved, you've got the private sector involved, you've got the academic institutions involved. I think you speak with a lot more authority because it's coming out of the area, it's coming out of the region, it's coming out of the locality, is this commitment. And believe me, I'm going to have the devil old job in terms of holding you folks back, in terms of what you want to do. And I think that's a much better position to be in, rather than say, well, I think it's the ultimate act of despair to say, what's the government going to do? What are you going to do about it? Because you've got the strength here. You've got some great traditions of financial services. I bet you can sort this out on a local basis. I bet you can move it along. I bet you can make that bit of a difference. Coventry has.
Okay. I mean, you mentioned the banks have been mentioned, lending, and you mentioned Vince Cable. How, from personal interest, how is the dynamic between yourself and Vince Cable supposed to happen, and how does it work in reality?
It works very well. I mean, obviously there have been tension because of the AV referendum, and Vince never looks like he's going to burst into song at any given time. But I have found him a remarkably easy guy to deal with. I found Chris Hume a remarkably easy guy to deal with, and the same is true of Nick Clegg. You've got to bear in mind that this kind of economic development we're talking about, it's in the coalition document, so we aren't actually having to negotiate everything we want to do. So I hope I aren't going to get into trouble. But there sometimes are the odd disagreement in Cabinet and in Cabinet committees. But it's often Conservative Liberal Democrats rowing with other Conservative and Liberal Democrats. Often I've often found myself agreeing with Vince and disagreeing with some Conservative colleagues. And it's worked kind of the other way. I think it's easier when it's within the coalition agreement and we're by and large working on things together. I mean, it was really easy to put the LEPs together. I mean, the kind of instinct, I think, on some of the government departments was to make it very restrictive. You know, the thing is to try and put the governance down, have various rules. And Vince grasped the idea of the LEPs being a kind of a close horse, at which people of ambition could actually put new powers, new services, sharing of sovereign together. Now, I hope Teesside doesn't seem to be like the teacher's pet within the area, but I thought Teesside really got it very quickly. They kind of understood it almost immediately. Coventry, I've said, really got it very quickly. The Essex and the Kent LEP really got it very quickly. But I won't say places that have struggled, but there are some places couldn't really get that. They kept waiting for me to tell them what to do. And sometimes it's really frustrating when people come and see you and say, well, what should we do? And I'll say, well, it's up to you. Yeah, but what would make you happy? Well, for you to make a bloody decision will be a start. Yeah?
How prescriptive were you with some of the LEPs or some of the areas that you felt should be structured the way they are now?
Well, if I'm honest, I gave some a push because some didn't want to deal with other neighbours, and I mean, it's obviously we obviously had lots of problems within the northwest, and particularly in Lancashire, which seem to be united in terms of not liking their neighbour on any circumstances. But we've managed to put unique to the northwest. Yeah, we've managed to put something together, but some just kind of grasped it. I mean, everybody said that you wanted a one an entire one within the northeast, and frankly, if that had been the case, we would have probably gone along. But it was pretty clear that what was offering those others was a better system. It looked a lot better. And I mean, if I was to maybe pick out one that really, I think, pushed the boundaries and really got my imagination, was the capital to coast, which essentially based the LEP around Gatwick and took in a number of sort of adjoining regional areas. And you kind of think, why do anybody think, if you go to the States, you'd naturally put something like this around regional airports. You'd naturally do that. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we get so high-bound, I think, by geography. I've been quite relaxed about LEPs cutting across local authority boundaries. I think a local authority are perfectly capable of rationally dealing with two LEPs.
Right. And do you have equally sort of strong views about enterprise zones and where they should be situated?
Well, I used to think they should be about 150 hectares each, but I've seen some of the stuff. It is actually quite interesting. I don't want to prejudge what I'm doing, but I do think this is important. And it's a bit like my auntie had 3 children, and I'd often go around there, and when they were having the Ribena, they were measuring the damn thing with a ruler, so one didn't get more than the other. And I think there's a kind of a irritating thing that's saying, they've got a LEP, they've got an enterprise, why haven't I got an enterprise? They've got one, you can't give them 2. And actually I think, we've got limited resources, but there are some places with enterprise zones pretty close by that are coming up with absolutely sonking ideas, really clever ideas. And you don't want to sort of put it in another area just because they haven't got one. You want to rather encourage them to come up with a slightly better idea.
Okay. So, got a question here.
But Eric, if you take that idea to its conclusion, in the northeast, where we have two LEPs, and we have a real regional identity, then presumably you would encourage the two LEPs to cooperate together to do things that we've done in the past in recent years, which have been very positive, so that we don't lose those things. So, you know, you actually have not the LEPs in competition with each other, but you do actually have cooperation, so that when we have built a synergy in the northeast, that continues.
Oh, of course I want people to cooperate. I don't want you to actively invade one another or send ninjas across the border to sabotage. I do want you to work together. But I'm not worried about them being a little bit of competition. I'm not worried of things that are happening in Teesside, or let's make it less, things that are happening in the Berkshire LEP or whatever. You saying, they're doing that, why shouldn't I do that? That's the kind of competition I want to see. I want you to be as ambitious as possible in terms of the kind of things you're prepared to do. You know, somebody, I think there was a committee report saying, thank goodness I haven't given you planning powers. Well, actually, if local authorities within the LEP wants to share some sovereignty on an agreed agenda with regard to some guidance on planning, I've got no problem about you doing that. I wouldn't stop you doing that. I wouldn't stop you coming together beyond economic planning. I wouldn't be averse on some aspects of local finance of you pooling resources together. What I've given you is a close horse around a given economic area, which I hope will grow organically. So it isn't quite as you were suggesting. This isn't about saying, don't speak to your neighbour. I want you to speak to your neighbour. But I don't want your neighbour to hold you down. I want you to pull your neighbour up with ideas.
Table 11, there's a question.
Good evening. I'm Jenny Saunders. I run a national charity with its headquarters in the North East. There aren't many of us doing that, but we play a big role in terms of the third sectors in the economy in our region. And my question is whether or not you think that the withdrawal of £3.5 billion from our sector in terms of grants, replaced with £100 million of transition fund, is adequate, given that we're going to have to make our transition. We're up to the task, but it's too quick for us to do that, given that we're taking on new responsibilities in delivering public services, in running the big society. My charity is trying to deliver energy efficiency for people on very low incomes, with energy prices escalating. So do you think it's time to pause and reflect on how quickly you're asking our sector, that is a big player in our economy, to make that transition?
No. But I'll give you a longer answer. I mean, we've got the leader of Sunderland. I got a bit of stick because I praise Sunderland Labour Authority. But I think the relationship that Sunderland has to the voluntary sector is bloody outstanding. I think it's really thought it through, and particularly in supporting people in the way that they've got themselves involved, a strategic decision in a proper kind of partnership. I think the days of grant for voluntary organisations have gone. I want you to see you in a proper partnership, working together, in which you kind of agree where the money's going to go, for you to take some of the responsibility from local authorities to kind of put that together. But I don't think you should be in any doubt that in order for us to be able to deliver a situation where you weren't going to lose a lot more money, maybe a couple of years down the line, you only need to see what's happened in Portugal, Ireland and Greece. And our levels of deficit are greater than any of theirs. What would have happened if we hadn't have done that? And the reason that we chose the phasing was, it was made absolutely crystal clear by Alistair Darling that this was a year in which roughly the level of the kind of reductions that will be faced would happen. And but I've certainly, I think, done my best. I think good, sensible authorities have done their best to try and ensure that voluntary organisations don't receive a greater cut than councils are receiving a reduction. And I think, you know, there are people in this room, leaders of councils within this room, there's another example with Linda over there, who have gone out of their way to ensure that happens.
Got time for one more question from table 10.
I'm Kate Welsh. I'm Chief Executive of the Aitken Group of Social Enterprises and a very proud member of the Board of One North East for a few more months. I want to challenge you actually on civil society. We happen to be a registered charity as part of our operation, but we deliver a whole range of both public services for the Department of Work and Pensions, Skills Funding Agency, and the world is in a mess as far as we're concerned in terms of the way that procurement's actually working and how that's actually going to deliver localism on the ground in terms of connectivity to local communities because of the fact that those contracts are being awarded to large prime contractors who aren't properly involving smaller organisations and because of the way some agencies are operating in not even actually putting contracts out to tender. So I think there's some big issues to tackle there that aren't actually fair for those. I mean, we're a social enterprise, 95% of our income through trading, but it's really tough to operate in a world where you can't connect into the procurement system because of the way that's operating.
I think you make a very reasonable point. I mean, I've seen a lot of this in terms of you know, the kind of fair deal operation, and that had a lot to do with sort of getting people back into work, and particularly difficult disabled client groups. And when you kind of looked out at what was available, it was often the relatively small provider that could offer a kind of a niche service. And part of the problem as we move on to payments by results, the bigger providers have the infrastructure, the critical mass to be able to do this, and smaller organisations don't. Now, there's been all kinds of solutions to this, to putting, in terms of the contracts, smaller organisations as subcontractors and as part of the bid and the deal. But I'm uneasy about that, and I'll tell you why. Because it's often the ethos of these niche organisations, it's often the way they operate that make them so effective. And bringing them together with the larger organisations don't actually work. Now, we're about to produce public service white paper. It'll be out, well, I can't say exactly, but fairly soon. I've seen it, so it's pretty imminent. And we hope to tackle some of those questions, but you're quite right to criticise, you're quite right to tick us off, but I think we do understand that there's a problem there.
Right, thank you. Before Mayor Linda Ackley comes on to say a vote of thanks, can I just ask you to show your appreciation for the Secretary of State?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.